Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we've got a highly focused session designed specifically for those of you gearing up for your diploma examinations. We are going to completely master the core concepts of spectroscopic methods of analysis, and we're putting a massive spotlight on the working principles of the spectrophotometer. Just a quick heads up, we'll be tackling gas-liquid chromatography in our next dedicated explainer, so keep an eye out for that. But for today, if you've been looking for a clear, structured way to visualize these instruments and understand exactly how they identify chemical substances, you are in exactly the right place. Let's get into it. Here is our roadmap for today. First, the principles of spectroscopic analysis. Second, types of spectroscopic methods. Third, we'll go inside a spectrophotometer. And fourth, we'll wrap up with industrial applications and conclusions. All right, part one, principles of spectroscopic analysis. To truly master the instruments themselves, we absolutely have to understand the fundamental physics that make spectroscopy possible in the first place. So, what exactly is spectroscopic analysis? Well, it's the application of spectroscopy to identify the fundamental properties of different atoms. We do this by measuring the completely unique frequencies of energy that atoms either absorb or radiate when their electrons shift configuration. The crucial takeaway here for your exams is that we aren't just measuring random pools of energy. We are measuring highly specific, discrete energy shifts that are totally unique to every single element on the periodic table. Okay, let's dive into the actual physics of the atom. You know that every atom has a nucleus surrounded by shells, and those shells contain a discrete number of electrons. When an atom is perfectly stable, we say it's in a ground state, which basically just means it's sitting in its lowest possible energy configuration. But if we excite that atom, say by hitting it with light radiation or heat, those electrons absorb that energy and shift to higher energy states. Now pay attention, because this is critical for your understanding. These shifts are highly restricted. An electron can't just drift anywhere it wants. It is strictly limited to discrete energy jumps. Because these jumps are locked to specific levels, the atom can literally only absorb or radiate discrete, highly specific amounts of energy. Moving right along to part two. Types of spectroscopic methods. Now that we have that baseline theory of discrete energy jumps down, let's see how we actually categorize these measurements in practice. The image you're looking at brilliantly illustrates the concept in action. This is the absorption spectrum of sodium. Imagine passing a beam of light containing all the frequencies of the rainbow through a thin film of sodium and then running that light through a prism. Notice those distinct, dark, vertical lines? That's not a glitch. Those represent the exact specific frequencies that are now missing from the light beam. And why are they missing? Because the sodium atoms actually absorbed that specific energy to fuel those exact electron jumps we just talked about. Every single compound containing sodium will produce these exact same missing lines. And this brings us to a classic examination comparison you absolutely need to commit to memory. On the left side, we have absorption spectroscopy. As we just saw with the sodium example, this measures the missing frequencies absorbed by a sample when we shine a light through it. Visually, it produces dark lines on a light background. Now, on the right, we have emission spectroscopy. Here, instead of shining a light through the sample, we excite the sample itself by placing it right into a flame or an electric arc. This intense energy causes the sample to actively emit radiation. When we capture this, it produces bright emission lines on a dark background. So basically, one measures what is taken away, and the other measures what is given off. Just to round out the categories defined in your syllabus, you should also be familiar with a couple of other key methods. First up is fluorescent spectroscopy. This is a bit of a hybrid. It measures the light emitted by a substance immediately after it has absorbed light. We call this photoluminescence. Second is mass spectroscopy, and this is a totally different beast. Here, we take a vapor or gas sample and literally bombard it with an electron beam to knock off electrons and create ions. We then accelerate these ions into a curved circular path. Because heavier ions take a wider turn than lighter ones, the radius of their path naturally varies with their mass, which effectively sorts them into distinct measurable beams. Let's actually look at a schematic of that mass spectrometer to lock in the concept. You can clearly see the ionization chamber on the left side where the sample gets bombarded. Then, notice that large semicircular tube. As the ions travel through that curve under a vacuum, they are sorted by mass. By measuring the strength of the resulting beam hitting the collector over on the right, we can literally count the different kinds of atoms present. It's an incredibly powerful way to find the exact chemical makeup of a substance. All right, let's get into part three, inside a spectrophotometer. For those of you studying the working principle of the spectrophotometer, this right here is the absolute core of your curriculum. We're going to take an anatomy of an instrument approach. What you're seeing is a brilliant illustration of the optical system of a Beckman ultraviolet spectrophotometer. I want you to trace the path with your eyes, starting from the light source on the right. This spatial mapping is highly critical for your exam memorization. You see the source light hitting a condensing mirror, traveling left to a collimating mirror, bouncing through a quartz prism, and eventually making its way to the sample cell and the phototube. Let's actually break down that mechanical sequence step by step, because this is exactly how you should describe it on a test. Step 1. We start with a light source providing the radiation. This is often a tungsten lamp if we want visible light, or a hydrogen discharge lamp for ultraviolet. Step 2. The light is focused onto an entrance slit. Step 3. The beam hits a collimating mirror, which makes the light rays perfectly parallel, before bouncing it through a prism, which refracts or bends the light to separate out all the different wavelengths. Step 4. By physically rotating that prism, we can aim one highly specific wavelength directly at the exit slit. Step 5. This isolated wavelength passes through our sample cell, which contains the actual fluid we are analyzing. And finally, Step 6. A phototube detector measures the intensity of the beam that actually made it through. By comparing the light intensity before and after it hit the sample cell, we know exactly how much of that specific wavelength was absorbed. Now, an important engineering detail to remember is that the equipment itself dictates what we can measure. The choice of prism material physically limits the wavelength range we can analyze. You can't just use one prism for everything. For example, a lithium fluoride prism is useful from 1.0 to 5.5 microns, whereas if we need to look at much longer infrared wavelengths, say up to 25 microns, we have to swap that out for a potassium bromide prism. The hardware always has to match the chemical application.
And finally, Part 4, Industrial Applications and Conclusions. Let's take all this abstract physics and instrument mechanics and bring it back to real-world industrial control. Why do chemical engineers and process technicians actually care so much about these instruments? Well, the crucial point is that spectroscopy is the closest approach we've ever made to the direct, real-time measurement and control of product quality. Different variations serve entirely different industries. Ultraviolet spectrometers are heavily used to analyze vitamin components or things like benzene and petroleum. Infrared spectrometers are often set up for continuous composition analysis, literally analyzing gas and liquid streams in real time as they flow through the pipes of a chemical plant. X-ray absorption is fantastic for measuring sulfur in oil or halogens in plastics. And emission spectroscopy, that's the go-to for heavy industry, analyzing metallic compounds like magnesium, aluminum, and steel.
To summarize just how powerful this all is, I want to leave you with a really great quote directly from our source text describing the absorption spectrum. It says, "This has been compared to a fingerprint in its uniqueness, although actually it is more individual." Think about that for a second. It's more unique than a fingerprint. Even different concentrations of the exact same substance in a liquid will produce completely different spectrograms. It is the ultimate, undeniable identifier of a chemical substance, all based on the fundamental laws of atomic physics. And that brings us to the end of today's explainer. As you prep for your exams and get ready to step out into the field as industrial process engineers, I want to leave you with this question to ponder. How will you apply these unique atomic fingerprints to measure and control your next chemical process system? Understanding the internal mechanics of the spectrophotometer isn't just about passing a test. It's about unlocking the ability to see and control the unseen building blocks of our industrial world. Don't forget to join us in our next explainer, where we'll be breaking down gas-liquid chromatography. Thanks so much for hanging out with us, and best of luck with your studies.